Hey y'all, I'm Heather.
And this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. Poison apple, poison Appalachia. Get it? I know, I'm such a dork. Anyhow, I wanted to do this podcast to cover the spooky things of Appalachia. Like I said, the dark side. Things like murders, folklore, mythology, disasters, just anything that isn't the bright, cheery side of the Appalachians. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my first podcast, and I hope that it's good enough that you listen to many, many more. And I just wanted to thank you for listening. So here we go. We're going to go to our first episode, which is Chief Cornstalk's Curse. I was the borderman's friend. Many times I have saved him and his people from harm. I never warred with you, but only to protect our wigwams and lands. I refused to join your pale-faced enemies with the redcoats. I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son, Elena Pisco. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of the peoples be paralyzed by the stain of our blood. Heavy words. But could this curse that was spoken almost 250 years ago be still felt in part of Appalachia to this day? Many people think so. Let's start with a little history about the area and about Chief Cornstalk. Appalachian region's history traced back to the indigenous people who lived here long before European arrival. Indigenous communities across the Appalachians developed diverse cultures, languages, and societies adapting to the region's varying environments and ecosystems. The Appalachian highlands and lowlands began to be settled by Europeans looking to extend their regions. The French and British explored the Appalachian Mountains. The French established settlements in the Great Lakes region of Canada, while the British colonies stretched along the eastern seaboard of what would become the United States. As the American frontiersmen began to move west in the 1770s, 7 nations of Native Americans, the Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot, Mingo, Miami, Ottawa, and Illinois, formed a powerful confederacy to keep the white men from infringing upon their territory. The Shawnee were the most powerful of the tribes and led by a feared and respected chieftain called Ki-ta-gua, which translates to Chief Cornstalk. I hope I pronounced that right. Cornstalk was not happy about the rapidly approaching European population. The white settlers were moving further down the Kanawha and Ohio rivers. The Native American Confederacy prepared to protect their lands. The nations began to mass in a rough line across the point from the Ohio River to the Kanawha River, numbering about 1,200 warriors. They began to make preparations to attack the white settlers near an area called Point Pleasant on the Virginia side of the Ohio River, which is now West Virginia. Fort Randolph had been recently built there for the Revolutionary War, and this is where most of this occurred. A little bit about Fort Randolph. It still stands today, and you can visit it. They even have a Christmas light show and have a Chief Cornstalk there, so that's kind of cool. You can visit the fort and take tours, and there's a cute little park there, too, that you can visit and have picnics. It's a nice little place, but I digress. The site where Fort Randolph was built emerged as a strategic location in the years before the American Revolution. In the Treaty of Fort Stanwix of 1768, the British Crown acquired the title to present-day West Virginia from the Iroquois. The Native Americans of Ohio country, who hunted on the land south of the Ohio River, had not been consulted in the 1768 treaty. Cornstalk was not happy about the rapidly approaching European population. He worked within the tribes of the area to halt what he considered an invasion. Much of his work came up empty. After the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, settlers and land speculators began moving into the land along the Ohio River. With assistance from the Mingo tribe, Cornstalk and his tribe fought the Virginia militia. While the number of fighters were fairly even on both sides, the Native Americans were no match for the muskets of the white soldiers. The battle ended with about 140 colonials killed and more than twice that number of Native Americans. He retreated. After the battle, Cornstalk's power waned, and he reluctantly accepted the treaty. However, he maintained a powerful presence that impressed the American militia. Cornstalk made peace with the white man the white men. He would carry word to his new friends while the British began talking to Native Americans about attacking the rebellious colonies. Soon the tribes again began massing on the Ohio River, intent on attacking the fort. Cornstalk and Red Hawk, a Delaware chief, no longer wanted war with the Americans, and they went to the fort on November 7th to try and negotiate a peace before fighting again began. Cornstalk told Captain Arbuckle, who commanded the garrison, that he was opposed to war with the colonists, but he and his tribe were holding back from joining on the British side. He was afraid that he would be forced to going along with the Confederacy if the rest of them did. He then told Arbuckle that he would allow his men to fight if the other tribes did. Cornstalk, Red Hawk, and another Native American were taken as hostages. The Americans believed that they could use him to keep the other tribes from attacking. They forced the Native Americans into a standoff, for none of them wanted to risk the life of their leader. Although taken as hostage, Cornstalk and the other Native Americans were treated well and were given comfortable quarters, leading many to wonder if the chief's hostage status may have been voluntary in the beginning. Cornstalk even assisted his captors in plotting maps of the Ohio River Valley during his imprisonment. On November 9th, Cornstalk's son, Ellen Pisco, came to the fort to see his father, and he was also detained. There's a slight divergence here to the story, but the end result is the same. The following day, gunfire was heard from outside the walls of the fort, coming from the direction of the Kanawha River. When men went out to investigate, they discovered that 2 soldiers who had left the stockade to hunt deer had been ambushed by the Native Americans. One of them has escaped, but the other man had been killed. I also read that the men were not hunting, that there were 2 soldiers who had escaped from the stockade, and they were ambushed by the tribes. Once again, the story goes, one escaped and one returned to the fort, one escaped and returned to the fort, and one was killed. When the bloody corpse was returned to the fort, the soldiers in the garrison were enraged. Acting against orders, they broke into the quarters where Cornstalk and the other Native Americans were being held. Acting out in rage, they decided to execute the prisoners as revenge. As the soldiers burst through the doorway, they say Cornstalk rose to meet them. He stood facing the soldiers with such bravery that they paused momentarily in their attack. It wasn't enough, though, and the soldiers opened fire with their muskets. Red Hawk tried to escape up through the chimney, but was pulled back down and slaughtered. Ellen Pisco, his son, was shot where he had been sitting on a stool, and the other unknown Native American was strangled to death. As for Cornstalk, he was shot 8 times before he fell to the floor. I've also read it was 9 times. Either way, the gunshots were fatal, but before he died, he uttered the curse that I said in the beginning. I'll repeat it again. I was the borderman's friend. Many times I have saved him and his people from harm. I never warred with you, but only to protect our wigwams and lands. I refused to join your pale-faced enemies with the redcoats. I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son, Ellen Pisco. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of the peoples be paralyzed by the stain of our blood. He spoke those words, and then he died. Is there power in a curse? Did anything happen in this area afterwards? Many people will say yes. It is true this area has faced many calamities and tragedies in the last 250 years. Some of the worst I'll try to cover here briefly. Several of these, though, I would like to go more in depth into in future episodes. We'll start with 1907, the Monoga mine explosion. On December 6, 1907, at Fairmount Coal Company's number 6's and number 8's mines in Monoga, West Virginia, there was an explosion that ended up killing 362 miners. It has been described as the worst mining disaster in American history and was one of the contributing events that led to the creation of the United States Mine Bureau of Mines, I should say. On Friday, December 6, 1907, there were 420 men in the 2 mines. At 10:28 a.m., an explosion occurred in one section of the mine, followed by a larger explosion in another area, instantly killing most of those inside. The blast caused damage to both the mine and the surface. The ventilation systems were destroyed, along with other equipment. The entrance and ventilation fan of number 8 mine were destroyed. Inside the mine, the timbers supporting the roof were blown down, which caused the roof to collapse. An official cause of the explosion was not determined, but investigators had theories that an electrical spark or one of the miners' open flame lamps ignited coal dust and methane gas. As a result of the explosion, the 1910 Congress created the United States Bureau of Mines with the goal of investigating and inspecting mines to reduce explosions and to limit the waste of human and natural resources. In addition, the Bureau of Motors set up the Bureau of Motors, Lord. The Bureau of Mines set up field officers that would train mine crews, provide rescue services, and investigate disasters. 1944 tornado outbreak. The 1944 Appalachians tornado outbreak was a deadly tornado outbreak that hit on June 22nd through 23rd, 1944. The outbreak produced several strong tornadoes in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland, areas that were falsely believed to be immune of tornadoes. Over 150 people died. The town of Shinston in Harrison County, West Virginia, was destroyed by a violent F4 tornado on June 23rd. A total of 30 people died in Shinston at the time. The outbreak itself was and still remains the deadliest tornado outbreak ever to hit the state of West Virginia. 1967, the Silver Bridge disaster. The Silver Bridge was an I-bar chain suspension bridge built in 1928, which carried U.S. Route 35 over the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio. Some say Gallipolis. I'm from here, and I say Gallipolis. Officially named the Point Pleasant Bridge, it was popularly known as the Silver Bridge for the color of its aluminum paint. On December 5th, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed amid heavy rush hour traffic, resulting in the deaths of 46 people, 2 of whom were never found. Investigation of the wreckage soon pointed to the failure of a single I-bar in one of the suspension chains as the primary cause. If you've ever heard of the legend of the Mothman, it's tied to the Silver Bridge disaster. I definitely plan to do a Mothman episode in the future. Also a Silver Bridge collapse episode in the future. 1968 Piedmont Airlines crash. On August 10, 1968, a Piedmont Airlines plane was approaching Charleston's Kanawha Airport when it clipped some trees, crashed into a hillside, and burned. 35 of the 37 people on board were killed. This remains the deadliest air disaster in the history of Charleston's airport, which is now named for aviator Chuck Yeager, who was a West Virginia native. 1970 Marshall football team killed in an airline crash. On November 14th, a Southern Airways DC-10 crashed into a mountain near Huntington, West Virginia, killing 75 people on board. They killed the Marshall Thundering Herd football program, boosters, and families. And they were all returning home after a tough 17-14 loss to East Carolina Pirates in Greenville, North Carolina. The plane was actually carrying 37 Thundering Herd football players, 8 football staff members, 25 athletic boosters, 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants, and a charter coordinator. They said that because some of the boosters were husbands and wives, that several kids ended up orphans after this. There's a movie named We Are Marshall about it, and I think I'll probably go into a full episode of this sometime down the line. 1976 jail explosion. In March, in the middle of the night at the Mason County Jail in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, there was an explosion. One of the prisoners was a woman named Harriet Sisk, who had been arrested for the murder of her infant daughter. On March 2nd, her husband Bruce came to the jail with a suitcase full of explosives to kill himself and his wife and to destroy the building. The explosion instantly killed the Sisk couple and Deputy Kenneth Ward Love and resulted in extensive damage to the jail, the courthouse, and surrounding buildings. Sheriff Elvin Wedge would die hours later, and Deputy Ernest Hessen would die of his injuries within a week. In total, 5 were killed and 11 were wounded in the bombing. In front of the new jail, there's actually a memorial there for the people that were killed during this, so it's kind of neat to check out if you're ever in the Point Pleasant area. 1978 freight train derailment. In January, a freight train derailed at Point Pleasant and dumped thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals. The chemicals contaminated the town's water supply, and the wells had to be abandoned. Really couldn't find much about this, but I just wanted to include it here, because it affected the area. April 1978, the Willow Island disaster. The Willow Island disaster was the collapse of a cooling tower under construction at the Pleasance Power Station at Willow Island, West Virginia. On April 27, 1978, 51 construction workers were killed. It's thought to be the deadliest construction accident in U.S. history. On June 8, 1978, OSHA cited Willow Island contractors for 20 violations, including failures to field test the concrete and anchor the scaffold system properly. The cases were settled for $85,000, or about $1,700 per worker killed. Not much at all. OSHA referred the case to the United States Department of Justice for criminal investigation. A grand jury was convened, but no charges were filed. The next several events I actually remember happening in my lifetime. Next is 1994 Shell chemical plant explosion in Belpre, Ohio. An abnormal chemical reaction occurred during the batch production of a thermoplastic rubber product, resulting in an explosion at the plant. As a result of the explosion, the reactor, process controls, accessories, control room, and building for this production unit were completely destroyed. 3 employees were killed. January 2006, Sago mine disaster. There was an explosion in the Sago mine in Sago, West Virginia on January 2nd, 2006. 13 coal miners were trapped, but all but one eventually died. The explosion occurred at approximately 6:30 a.m. at the beginning of the first shift after the mine reopened after the New Year holiday weekend. There was no final conclusion on what caused the explosion. Possible causes could have been lightning strike, seismic activity, sparks from restarting the machines after the holiday, or proximity to active gas and oil wells. April 2010. On April 5th, 2010, at approximately 3:02 p.m., an explosion ripped through the underground workings at Performance Coal Company's UBBMC Mont Coal Eagle Mine, also called Upper Big Branch Mine. It took the lives of 29 miners and injured 2 others. On December 6, 2011, concluded that the flagrant safety violations contributed to this explosion. It had issued 369 citations at the time, assessing $10.8 million in penalties. Alpha Natural Resources, which had been bought by Massey Energy in 2011, settled its corporate criminal liabilities with the U.S. Attorney for $209 million. One survivor reported that he felt a rush of air followed by a blast of hurricane winds. He encountered flying debris as he escaped the mine. The blast was heard and felt for miles. A miner working at another mine site, approximately 7 miles away from the blast when it happened, said, "It was just like your ears stopped up. You couldn't hear. And it was like being in the middle of a tornado. Rail lines were twisted like pretzels, according to rescue workers, and mining machines were blown to pieces." January 2014, Elk River chemical spill. In January 2014, approximately 10,000 gallons of chemicals used to process coal spilled from a storage tank into the Elk River in West Virginia. The Elk River is a municipal water source which serves over 300,000 people in the Charleston area. The chemical, with a long name I cannot pronounce, was called MCHM. Residents were advised not to drink, cook with, bathe, or wash with West Virginia tap water. Up to 300,000 residents were affected. The area spanned from 9 counties within the Charleston, West Virginia area. Nobody was seriously hurt with this, but I know several people ended up in the hospital for different symptoms after this. It's a lot of disasters to hit this area. But is Chief Cornstalk's curse real? Why did none of the disasters start until the 20th century? I mean, you would think his curse would start right away and not 125 years later. Do you believe in curses? What do you think? Me personally, I don't know. I try to keep an open mind about everything, and there are a lot of things that have happened in this area, it's true. But I don't know how long a curse lasts or how far it can go, so who knows? Maybe one day Chief Cornstalk will forgive us all. Until then, if you live in this area, just watch your back. Thanks for listening to my first podcast. Hope it wasn't too bad. If you like spooky, dark things, you may want to keep listening. I plan on covering the dark stories of all of Appalachia. Myths, legends, true crime, and disasters. I was born and raised in Appalachia, southeastern Ohio, so a lot will probably be in the Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky area at first because it's where I'm from and what I know about. So I would eventually like to encompass all the Appalachian area. The whole Appalachian region includes all of West Virginia, parts of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. I had no idea that Alabama and Mississippi were considered part of the Appalachian region. But, so I have a lot of things to talk about, and if you have any story suggestions, let me know. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And also, I just wanted to say, it is definitely Appalachia and not Appalachia. Even though my mom calls it Appalachia, but she's wrong. You can hit me up on social media. I've created a couple of pages. I haven't done a lot with them yet, but I intend to. You can catch me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. poisonedapp.twitter.com. That's APP. I'm on Threads. Threads.net/poisoned/ or little hyphen, I don't know what it's called, Appalachia. So that's threads.net/@poisoned Appalachia. Also, I'm on Facebook, of course. It's Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia, which you can find on facebook.com/profile. And just put in Poison Appalachia. You can also find me on Instagram, Poison Appalachia. It was actually poison and then lowercase hyphen Appalachia. And also, I'm on TikTok under Poisoned Appalachia. So pretty much all of those, if you just type in Poisoned Appalachia, you should find me there. So, just wanted to thank everybody for all your support in listening to this. I hope you tune in to many more, and I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.